Early morning, June 6, 1944. Erwin Rommel, the field marshal who spent 6 months turning 2,000 miles of European coastline into the most heavily fortified defensive line ever built, is not at his command post. He's inland, at his wife's 50th birthday party. The decision to leave was easy. The weather forecast said the English Channel would stay too rough for an invasion. Impossible conditions. The Atlantic Wall, millions of mines, countless obstacles, interlocking artillery, wouldn't be tested today. It was the kind of confidence that lets a commander leave during the only invasion season that mattered. The phones at his headquarters started ringing anyway. By the time Rommel got the news and raced back toward the coast, the first wave of the largest amphibious assault in history was already ashore. 150,000 Allied soldiers, crossing water that was supposed to be uncrossable, hitting beaches that were supposed to be impregnable. What the German High Command didn't know was that the Allies hadn't just planned to break through the Atlantic Wall, they'd planned to make it irrelevant. The fortifications would hold for hours. The invasion only needed a day. And the fight wasn't won with more concrete or bigger guns. It was won by attacking something the Germans never thought to defend: time itself. But the trap that made this possible was set 18 months earlier. January 1943, Casablanca. Sand in the doorway, ash in the ashtrays, and a map of Europe that looks like a dare. The Americans arrive with a blunt idea. George Marshall, the architect of American strategy, has a simple position. The short road to Berlin runs straight across the English Channel. Hit France, drive east, end the war. Winston Churchill has a different vision, wrapped in the kind of poetry that makes logistics sound romantic. He calls it the soft underbelly of Europe. The plan: invade Italy first, knock out a weak Axis partner, and approach Germany from the south. Mountains, Churchill promises, will fold more easily than beaches. Franklin Roosevelt watches these two theories circle and collide. He listens to Marshall's directness and Churchill's eloquence. And sitting in the corner, like an accountant who never blinks, is the reality of logistics. Ships, landing craft, trained divisions, air superiority. The math of actually moving hundreds of thousands of men across hostile water. In the end, the calendar flips to the Mediterranean. The cross-channel invasion is deferred, not cancelled, deferred. Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, will sail that summer instead. The Casablanca decision cuts both ways. On one hand, Germany has been given something its generals can use better than gasoline: time. Time to pour concrete. Time to lace beaches with obstacles. Time to bet the entire Western defense on a fortified shoreline. The delay is a gift to anyone who wants to dig in. But on the other hand, the Allies get time too. Time to build landing craft. Time to train divisions. Time to learn what actually works when you throw an army against a defended coast. And in July of 1943, Operation Husky proves the concept. More than 3,000 ships carry 150,000 men onto Sicilian beaches in the first days. It's proof that the Allies can move armies over salt water when they choose to. It's proof that amphibious assault at this scale is possible. Germany reads the Casablanca decision as sanity returning to London and Washington. The idea of a cross-channel attack in 1943 must have seemed reckless, maybe impossible. Surely they'll stick to the Mediterranean now. Surely they won't risk everything on a channel crossing while they still have momentum in the south. This misreading becomes part of the trap. The forward hook is invisible. The Allies are learning. They're building. And every month of delay means more steel, more training, more refinement of the machinery that will eventually cross that channel. Even the chaos of war production tells the story. In November of 1943, landing craft in US factories slip all the way down to 12th priority. Someone makes a calculation. Someone signs a paper. A week later, the order is yanked back up. It's a paperwork twitch, but it measures real steel. The date on a meeting note moves hulls across an ocean. Decisions about production priority decide how fast you can cross water and when you'll be ready to try. By late 1943, the Allies have a target date in mind: spring or early summer of the following year, and Germany knows an invasion is coming. The question is where, and when, and whether it can be stopped. Rommel gets handed a title in November of 1943 that no one receives if things are going well. Inspector of Western Defences. He's the man who fought in North Africa, who understands mobile warfare and combined arms and the brutal speed of modern combat. Now he's sent to look at the Atlantic Wall, and what he finds is not a fortress. It's a sketch. A propaganda promise that hasn't been kept, bunkers without depth, obstacles in tidy rows that don't yet bite. There's even a skeptical voice inside German headquarters that says it out loud. The Atlantic Wall is no wall. It's a thin cord with knots. Rommel decides to make it a threshing machine. His doctrine is simple and ruthless. We must stop them in the water. Not on the beaches, not inland, in the water. Before they can organize, before tanks roll off landing craft, before the beachhead becomes a fortress of its own. He sets a practical test for this idea. If you can't counterattack fast enough under Allied air superiority, then the killing has to happen at the tide line. Every piece of steel, every mine, every obstacle has to matter in the first minutes of the invasion. So Rommel tours the coast with a notebook and fresh worry lines, and he starts to build. Mines by the millions. Estimates vary, but by the spring of 1944, German engineers have scattered somewhere between 4 and 6 million mines across the western coast. Millions of them. Rommel pushes to triple the beach mine belts over the winter. Then come the obstacles. Hedgehogs, welded steel frames designed to rip the bottom out of landing craft. Ramps with explosive charges wired at the tip. Rows of angled rails planted in the tidal zone to flip a boat and drown its cargo. Stakes driven into the sand at angles calculated to catch a hull at high tide. Wire everywhere. Casemates with interlocking fields of fire. Artillery pre-sighted to rake the tidal flats so that every gun knows exactly where to drop shells when shapes appear in the surf. And it doesn't stop at the water. Inland, Rommel orders Rommelspargel, Rommel's asparagus. Tall wooden stakes planted in fields to slaughter gliders and prevent airborne landings behind the beaches. The preparations are meticulous. The arithmetic becomes a genuine threat. By the spring of 1944, the coast has become one of the most heavily fortified defensive lines ever constructed. It looks like certainty hammered into the sand. It sounds like confidence when Rommel uses the word edge. But every steel tooth on that beach is also a confession. If you can't move armor under Allied air power, if the counterattack can't reach the beaches in time, then you're admitting that this is your only chance. Everything has to work in the first hours, or it doesn't work at all. While Rommel is turning the French coast into a killing field, the Allies are drawing a different kind of map over the same countryside. This map doesn't care about bunkers. It cares about time and movement and the invisible systems that feed an army. February 1944. American and British bombers begin a campaign that history will call Big Week. For 6 days straight, they hammer German fighter production and tangle with Luftwaffe squadrons in battles that bleed the German Air Force white. Factories burn. Experienced pilots die in cockpits they can't replace. The Luftwaffe doesn't collapse in a week, but it takes damage it can't fully recover from. More importantly, the balance shifts. Allied escort fighters grow teeth and legs. They're not just defending bombers anymore, they're hunting. Daylight over occupied Europe starts to belong to someone else. This matters because everything else that's about to happen depends on controlling the air. If you can't move reinforcements during the day without getting strafed, you're already losing the race against the clock. But the air campaign is just the visible part. There's a second map, being drawn by a man most people have never heard of. His name is Solly Zuckerman, and he's a civilian scientist with an idea that sounds boring until it shows what it does. He keeps pointing at railway lines, not cities, not factories, not the obvious targets. He wants to hit the nervous system that feeds northern France. Bridges, rail yards, junction points, the nodes that turn divisions on a map into actual reinforcements rolling toward a battlefield. The strategy gets a bureaucratic name, the transportation plan, and it has a vicious consequence. Throughout the spring of 1944, Allied bombers systematically wreck the French rail network. Bridges go down. Yards turn into craters. Trains that should carry panzers to the coast get stuck, rerouted, delayed, or forced onto roads where they become targets for fighter bombers the pilots call jabos. Timetables that once moved with German precision turn into rumors and prayers. The 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich, will spend days crawling north after D-Day, stuck behind wrecked bridges and harassed by resistance fighters who move faster than the trains that aren't running. Road convoys creep by night to dodge air attacks. Daytime movement becomes suicide. The frustration shows up in German command reports. Rail delays, sorties over the routes, bridges out again. And the effect shows up on D-Day and after, when the counterattack that's supposed to throw the Allies back into the sea arrives late, in pieces or on foot. The transportation plan doesn't win any parades. It doesn't make for dramatic footage. It just rots the clock the enemy needs to win. Every hour of delay is an hour the Allies spend reinforcing the beachhead, bringing up tanks, digging in, and turning a toehold into a fortress. The plan is maliciously effective because it's invisible. Railways being destroyed don't make headlines. Panzer divisions that should be at the coast still struggling to get there 3 days later. That's what wins battles. And then there's the third piece of the trap: deception. While bombers wreck the rail network, a ghost army grows in southeastern England. It's built from rubber, radio, and audacity. General George Patton, one of the most famous American commanders, becomes the loudest part of something that barely exists. He's given command of the 1st US Army Group, a force that looks enormous on paper and in German intelligence reports. Radio networks chatter with false traffic. Dummy tanks park under hedges where German reconnaissance planes can spot them. Entire fake divisions appear in Kent, the part of England closest to Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point of the Channel crossing. The message is clear and repeated. This is where the real invasion is coming. The deception operation is called Fortitude, and it's orchestrated by British intelligence with the help of double agents who have spent years earning German trust. One of them, codenamed Garbo, becomes the star of this invisible theatre. Garbo sends more than 500 messages to German handlers in the months before D-Day. Hundreds of detailed reports about troop movements, supply buildups, and preparations for an assault on Calais. He's so trusted that on the night of June 5th, he even sends a warning that the Normandy invasion is about to begin. The message is timed perfectly to arrive too late to matter, but early enough to protect his credibility. The Germans will believe he tried to warn them. They'll keep listening to him, and in the weeks after D-Day, Garbo will send more messages insisting that Normandy is a diversion, that the real blow is still coming at Calais, that Patton's massive army group is still waiting to cross. The German 15th Army buys it completely. This is a powerful force, roughly 18 divisions strong. That's something like 250,000 soldiers, more troops than landed on D-Day itself. And they're sitting idle. They watch the skies, they guard the beaches at Pas-de-Calais, and they stay there. Not for a day, not for a week, through June and into July, while the real battle rages in Normandy. A huge chunk of German strength sits frozen, guarding a coastline that will never see an invasion. The deception has the malicious humor of a street magician pointing at the narrow crossing where logic says the blow should land, while the real attack happens somewhere else. When D-Day arrives, those divisions aren't there. When the counterattack is supposed to form, they're not released. The reserves guard rubber tanks and radio ghosts. So by late May of 1944, the pieces are in place. The Luftwaffe is battered. The rail network is a wreck. The 15th Army is watching the wrong coastline. The landing craft are built. The divisions are trained. The plan is ready. All that's left is a decision about weather. And that decision belongs to one man, The weather in early June is terrible. Rain lashes southern England. The channel churns with waves that would swamp landing craft and drown men before they ever see a beach. At Southwark House, the Allied command centre, tension builds like a physical presence in the room. The invasion was supposed to launch on June 5th, but the weather makes that impossible. General Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, needs a forecast he can bet 150,000 lives on. The man who has to give in that forecast is Group Captain James Stagg, a quiet Scottish meteorologist with a spine of steel. Stagg walks into a room full of generals and admirals and tells them something they don't want to hear. The storm isn't ending, but there's a crack coming. Not a calm sea, not good weather. A crack, a brief window on June 6th, when conditions will be marginal but possible. After that, the weather closes in again for weeks. It's not the ideal invasion weather anyone hoped for. It's barely acceptable. But it's what they have. Eisenhower listens to the forecast. He listens to his subordinates weigh in. The air commanders worry about cloud cover and visibility. The naval commanders worry about rough seas and navigation. The ground commanders worry about everything that comes after the landing. Eisenhower calls a pause, a 24-hour delay. The massive invasion fleet, already in motion, has to be recalled and held. And then, in the small hours of June 5th, at around 3:30 in the morning, Eisenhower says the only sentence that matters in the middle of a gamble. Okay, we'll go. He has a second sentence in his pocket that morning, already written on a slip of paper. It's predated to July 5th, as if the invasion has already happened and failed. Our landings have failed, and I have withdrawn the troops. My decision to attack at this time and place was based on the best information available. The troops, the air, and the navy did all that bravery and devotion to duty could do. If any blame or fault attaches to the attempt, it is mine alone. He never has to use it, but the fact that he wrote it shows the weight of that decision. He's betting everything on a weather forecast, on marginal conditions, on a crack in the storm. And that crack exists partly because of a signal that travelled from an Irish lighthouse. Barometer readings called in from Blacksod Point on the western coast of Ireland helped feed Stagg's forecast. It's one of those quiet details that moves armies. A lighthouse keeper takes a reading. A meteorologist interprets it. A general says go, and history turns. By the time the decision is made and the orders go out, the channel is filled with nearly 7,000 vessels. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, transports, landing craft of every size and type. The largest invasion fleet ever assembled. It looks like something a child would spill out of a toy box, except every piece is full of men, and steel, and purpose. The invasion fleet is so large that it stretches across the horizon in every direction. From the air, the shape of the operation writes itself in ship wakes. 5 assault groups, each aimed at a different beach. 5 names that will be burned into history by the end of the day. Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, Sword. Before dawn on June 6th, the paratroopers drop. They're the first men into France, jumping out of transport planes into a countryside that smells of hedges and diesel and fear. They're not abstractions in a briefing room. They're soldiers who trip over fences and land in ponds and drown in flooded fields because Rommel ordered the water levels raised. They fight for bridges that have to be held before the beach landings even begin. They scatter across drop zones that are supposed to be organized and instead turn into chaos. Some units lose half their strength in the first hours. Some soldiers land miles from where they're supposed to be, but enough of them land close enough to take their objectives. The bridges at Bénouville and Ranville are captured by British glider troops in a raid that happens so fast the Germans barely have time to realize they're under attack. American paratroopers secure the western flank, cutting roads and holding key positions. By the time the sun starts to rise, the airborne assault has done its job. It's messy, it's costly, but it's working. Offshore, the naval bombardment begins. The big guns on battleships and cruisers open up on German positions, walking shells across fortifications that Rommel spent months perfecting. Destroyers push in close, so close they risk running aground, to blast bunkers that threaten the landing zones. The noise is physical. It shakes the air and the ground and the water, and then the landing craft start their run toward the beaches. This is where Rommel's plan is supposed to work. This is where the obstacles and mines and pre-sighted artillery are supposed to turn the tide line into a graveyard. And for a few hours, on Omaha Beach, it almost does. Omaha is a nightmare. The beach is narrow, overlooked by bluffs that give German defenders perfect fields of fire. The naval bombardment, for all its sound and fury, doesn't knock out enough of the bunkers. The bombers that were supposed to crater the defenses drop their loads inland, missing the beach entirely. When the first landing craft hit the obstacles, men pour out into water that's deeper than it should be, rougher than the forecasts promised. Equipment is too heavy. Soldiers go under and don't come back up. The ones who make it to the beach find themselves in a killing zone. German machine guns and artillery have every inch of that sand pre-targeted. There's almost no cover. The plan calls for engineers to blow gaps through the obstacles, for tanks to land and provide fire support, for organized units to move inland quickly. Instead, there's chaos. Companies land in the wrong sectors. Officers die in the first minutes. Tanks sink or burn. The engineers trying to clear obstacles work under fire so intense that some teams are wiped out before they finish. For a while, Omaha looks like the invasion might break right there. Company E of the 16th Infantry goes ashore into conditions that shouldn't be survivable. They wade through water that claws at equipment and fills lungs. They cross a beach where the sand itself seems hostile, where every step forward is against fire coming from positions they can't see clearly. A battalion commander named Colonel George Taylor arrives on the beach to find men pinned down behind a low seawall, unable to move forward, taking casualties from artillery and mortars. He grabs a stick, because nothing else is left to wave, and shouts something that becomes famous. There are only two kinds of people who are staying on this beach, those who are dead and those who are going to die. Now let's get the hell out of here. It's not eloquent. It's not inspiring in the way speeches are supposed to be, but it's true, and it moves men. What saves Omaha isn't the plan working as designed. It's junior officers and NCOs taking initiative, engineers blowing gaps under fire, destroyers pushing so close to shore that they can read house numbers on buildings and firing at anything that flashes, and soldiers deciding that forward is the only direction that makes sense. Slowly, in pockets, the line moves. By mid-morning there are gaps in the obstacles. By afternoon there are troops at the top of the bluffs. By evening, the beach is held. Barely. Bloodily, but held. The Atlantic Wall does exactly what it was built to do for those hours on Omaha. It kills efficiently. It stops forward momentum. It proves that concrete and steel in the right positions can hold back an assault. But there's a problem with a defense that works only at the water's edge. It only works if you can keep the enemy at the water's edge, and Omaha is just one beach. At Utah Beach, the story is different. The landing drifts off course because of strong currents. Units come ashore about a mile south of where they're supposed to be. It's an accident. It's also a gift. The defenses where they actually land are lighter than the defenses at the planned landing site. Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr., the son of a former president and the only general to land with the first wave, looks around, assesses the situation, and makes a decision that becomes another famous line. We'll start the war from here. And they do. Utah becomes the easiest of the 5 beaches. Casualties are relatively light. The link-up with paratroopers happens faster than planned. By the end of the day, Utah is secure. The British and Canadian beaches, Gold, Juno, and Sword, each have their own stories. Juno is rough. The Canadians take heavy casualties in the first waves, but they push inland farther than almost any other Allied unit on D-Day. Gold and Sword are grinding fights against dug-in defenders, but the combination of naval gunfire, specialized armor, and sheer determination breaks through. By nightfall, All 5 beaches are held. The Atlantic Wall has defenders. It has guns. It has killed thousands of men. But it doesn't have the one thing it needs: time. The Allies are ashore. The build-up is beginning. And the German counterattack that's supposed to drive them back into the sea hasn't arrived. The plan to break the invasion lives on rails that keep disappearing. A panzer regiment needs a bridge that no longer exists. A division staff finds that a timetable is not a promise anymore, it's a prayer. The transportation plan is paying off in the cruelest possible way for Germany. Units that should be rolling toward Normandy are stuck in rail yards or crawling along secondary roads. Commanders call for reinforcements and are told the reinforcements are on their way. But on their way now means hours or days instead of hours. The Luftwaffe still flies and still kills, but it doesn't own the daylight anymore. Allied fighters and fighter-bombers prowl the skies. Anything that moves during the day becomes a target. The escorts have time to be bored or vicious, but not worried. One pilot brought a Thunderbolt home a few days before D-Day with its canopy shot off and holes peppering everything that could hold a hole. The crew chief stopped counting at 200 perforations. That plane flew again. That's the level of air superiority the Allies have achieved by June of 1944. And then there's the question of higher command. Hitler sleeps late on June 6th. The authority to release the armoured reserves sits with him, which means it sits with silence for most of the morning. Rommel, the man who built the Atlantic Wall and who insisted that the counterattack must come immediately, is not at the coast. He's inland, visiting his wife for her 50th birthday, because the weather forecast said the channel would stay too rough for an invasion. He gets the news over the phone. By the time he's racing back toward the coast, hours have been lost. Hours that matter. The one panzer division that stirs on D-Day is the 21st Panzer. It's stationed close enough to respond quickly. But its commander, Edgar Feuchtinger, is not with his division. He's in Paris. By the time he gets back and gets the unit moving, it's late morning. The division pushes toward the gap between Juno and Sword beaches and briefly reaches the coast near Luc-sur-Mer and Lyons-sur-Mer around 8 in the evening. German grenadiers can see the channel. For a moment, it looks like the doctrine might work. A quick, hard counterattack that splits the beachhead and isolates Allied units. But the moment doesn't last. British gliders are coming in over the heads of German troops. Naval guns are adjusting fire. The position is untenable. The 21st Panzer pulls back. That's the sum total of the German armoured response on D-Day. One division, arriving late, biting lightly, withdrawing at dusk. The broader counterattack, the one that's supposed to involve multiple panzer divisions smashing into the beachhead before it solidifies, never forms. Part of the reason is the transportation plan. Part of it is command confusion and Hitler's delayed release of reserves. But part of it is fortitude. The Ghost Army is still working. The 15th Army at Pas-de-Calais still believes the main blow is coming later and heavier. Garbeau's messages after D-Day insist that Normandy is a feint, that Patton's army group is still waiting in Kent, ready to launch the real invasion. German intelligence buys it. The 15th Army stays in place. 18 divisions, 250,000 troops, more than enough to tip the balance in Normandy, sit idle and watch the wrong sea. They're competent troops. They're ready to fight. They're just guarding a coastline that will never see an Allied soldier. The enemy is competent enough to recognize a threat and proud enough to believe his own intelligence. He watches himself get held in place by clever radio work, rubber tanks, and the ghost of George Patton. He's forced to delay, while the one day that mattered is being decided without him. The Atlantic Wall doesn't fail because it's poorly built. It fails because the battle it was designed to win is over, before the defenders can bring their full strength to bear. By the end of June 6th, more than 150,000 Allied soldiers are on French soil. 5 beachheads hold. The cost is real and heavy. Around 10,000 Allied casualties in one day, with more than 4,000 confirmed dead. Those numbers are not abstractions. Every one of them is a soldier who went into the water or onto the sand and didn't come back. But the cost buys something concrete: a foothold in France. The Atlantic Wall has thrown back men for hours. It has proven that fortifications matter, that defensive fire can be devastating, that an amphibious assault is the most difficult operation in warfare, but it hasn't stopped the invasion. And once you're past that first day, once the beachheads and reinforcements are flowing, the mathematics begin to shift in ways that concrete can't answer.
The next good tide and moon window for an invasion comes around mid-June, roughly 2 weeks later. If Eisenhower had waited, if he'd decided that the marginal weather on June 6th was too risky, the invasion would have been postponed. And on June 19th, the Channel answered with the worst storm in 40 years. For 3 days straight, winds and waves lashed the Normandy coast. The temporary harbours the Allies have built to handle supply ships called mulberries take a catastrophic beating. Mulberry A, the American harbour off Omaha Beach, breaks apart and dies. Hundreds of landing craft are driven ashore or sunk. Piers collapse. The logistics operation that's supposed to feed the build-up nearly comes apart. Mulberry B, the British harbour at Aramash, survives, with heavy damage and emergency repairs. But for days, the flow of supplies drops to a trickle. If this storm had hit during the invasion itself, the greatest amphibious operation in history would have burst against a wall of water and broken. Landing craft would have swamped. Ships would have been scattered or lost. Men who made it to the beaches would have been cut off from reinforcement and supply. The entire operation would have been impossible. Rommel's weather forecast, the one that said the Channel would stay too rough for an invasion in early June, was almost right. If Eisenhower had followed the safe, conservative choice and waited for the next window, the Atlantic Wall would have met those seas instead of Allied soldiers. The sentence Eisenhower spoke in the small hours of June 5th, "Okay, we'll go," took that storm away from the Germans. The weather decision decided the invasion. Stagg's crack in the storm, the narrow window on June 6th, was real, and it closed behind the Allies like a door slamming shut. The Atlantic Wall never got the chance to fight the invasion under the conditions its builders hoped for. It met the one day when the weather split, just enough to let killers through. By the end of June, Cherbourg falls. The capture of a deep-water port is the kind of victory that doesn't look dramatic, but changes everything. A beachhead can hold for a while on what you can bring ashore over open beaches or through temporary harbours. But if you want to build up for a breakout, if you want to sustain a major offensive into the heart of Europe, you need a real port. Cherbourg gives the Allies that. It's battered. The Germans wrecked the port facilities before surrendering, so it takes weeks to make it fully operational. But it belongs to the Allies now. The supply line is secure. The build-up stops being a question. Tonnage starts to flow. And tonnage, in the end, is how you win. On July 1st, a German field marshal who has seen 3 wars makes a phone call that gives away what's left of the secret. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Commander-in-Chief West, is asked what Germany should do next. His answer is short and profane. "Make peace, you idiots." It's not defeatism. It's arithmetic. The Atlantic Wall was supposed to stop the invasion at the water's edge. It didn't. The counterattack was supposed to throw the Allies back into the sea in the first hours or days. It didn't arrive in time. The 15th Army was supposed to be the reserve that tipped the balance. It's still sitting at Calais, guarding rubber tanks. By July, the situation in Normandy is not salvageable by willpower or propaganda. The Allies have air superiority, naval superiority, and a secure lodgment. Reinforcements pour in faster than Germany can respond. The math is brutal and clear. Von Rundstedt says it out loud, and the next day he's out of his job. The truth is unwelcome. The 15th Army keeps watching the wrong sea through July and into August. The Ghost Army keeps them pinned. Garbo keeps sending messages. Fortitude keeps working long after it should have been obvious that Normandy was the real invasion. It's a testament to how well the deception was constructed, and how badly Germany wanted to believe that the Allies wouldn't dare risk everything on a single throw. When the 15th Army is finally released and starts moving toward Normandy, it's too late. The breakout is already beginning. The bocage fighting is grinding and brutal, but the beachhead is secure. The supply lines are open,
and the weight of Allied material superiority is starting to roll. By August, entire German armies are trapped in the Falaise pocket, surrounded and destroyed. By late August, Paris is liberated. The Atlantic Wall, the fortress that was supposed to make invasion impossible, is defending empty beaches and calendar pages. Rommel's doctrine was crisp and logical. Kill them on the shoreline. If they get inland, we lose. He built the shoreline into a machine to do exactly that. He checked the timetables. He calculated the best times for invasion and prepared for them. And on the night it mattered most, he was far from the water because the weather forecast said there was no way the Allies could cross. The phones rang at his headquarters anyway. The first wave refused to be erased by the obstacles and the fire. The counterattack refused to arrive on time. The reserves stayed frozen at Calais. The ghost of Patton's army kept an entire German field army in place while the real battle was decided elsewhere. The Atlantic Wall fought the problem it could understand: men running up a beach. It fought well. Omaha Beach proved that. But there was a different problem that mattered more: when those men arrive, and whether anyone can reach them in time to stop the build-up. One of those fights can be won with concrete and steel and mines. The other fight was won with a weather forecast, a cut railway timetable, and a lie told so well that the enemy believed it for months. The wall defended space. The Allies attacked time. And time, as it turns out, is the one thing you can't fortify. The numbers are not sentimental and they do not pick sides. In one day, more than 150,000 men crossed a narrow sea under the cover of nearly 12,000 aircraft and the guns of almost 7,000 vessels. The largest invasion fleet ever assembled. In 1 week in February, the Luftwaffe lost enough fighters and pilots to change how daylight worked over Europe. In one spring, bridges and rail yards in northern France became a maze of detours and delays. In 1 month after the landings, a deep water port changed owners and the build-up stopped being a question. The numbers dwarf the propaganda about Fortress Europe. 2 voices, both German. One at the beginning, a field marshal, who insists that the only safe place to kill an amphibious army is in the surf, who builds a massive defensive system to do exactly that, and who goes inland on a night when the weather says invasion is impossible. The other voice at the end of June, another field marshal, whose patience and pride are done. Make peace, you idiots. Between those 2 sentences, the Atlantic Wall learned what a calendar can do when your enemy writes it better than you do. The humiliation wasn't that concrete fails under fire. Everything fails under enough fire. It wasn't that the soldiers fought badly. Many of them fought well. The humiliation was that the confidence aimed at the wrong threat. The wall was built to stop an army at the water's edge. But the Allies never planned to be stopped there. They planned to arrive at the right time, from the right direction, with the enemy's reinforcements stuck on broken rails and phantom armies holding entire divisions in place. They planned to fight on a clock the Germans couldn't match. And when the moment came, they had a crack in a storm just wide enough to let an invasion through. The Atlantic Wall held for hours. The Allies needed a day. And in war, the side that controls time controls everything else.